layers of grief. As you notice, every day I'm challenging you in the 5 selves. And you have gotten through the process of choosing to grieve. If you've gotten this far, you're doing the hard work. And you're probably thinking, this is too hard, or maybe this isn't helping. I really challenge you as we go into this layers of grief, and we're not going to discuss every layer, and the layers of grief are different for each one of us. But I want you to think about this whole process is controlled grief. And that's why I ask you every day, what are you doing to grieve? But also, are you addressing your spiritual self? Are you praying? Are you meditating? Are you trying to figure out who you are, who your soul is, and where is it connected? Are you doing the self-improvement exercises? Are you caring for yourself? Are you figuring out what actually fills your cup? And that continued journaling. So today is this day 10 and kind of the first part of the layers of grief. And here we are talking about anger again. So you can tell my top layer is anger. And I have some depression too. And but for me, I feel like my anger was justified or is justified. And I'm still angry, but I need to release some of that, get through some of that. And, anger is a very intense and harmful emotion. It impacts all of who we are. It impacts us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, right? If you're angry, then you have to also be angry with the Creator or the universe or God, whatever you call your spiritual relationship. If you're angry, that has something to do with that. And that's why I make you address it every day or every week. What I have learned about my layers and my anger may not work for you. Don't give up on this process if you don't resonate with everything that I say. These layers are painful. And underneath that anger, that top protective layer, could be unbearable pain, or what feels like unbearable pain. And that's why I talk about those 5 selves. And, when we think of layers, it's definitely not layers of a cake. This is not tasty and beautiful, and it doesn't get better. My son was a big Shrek fan, and I had to watch Shrek hundreds of times over and over and over again. And I remember that line. It's like, ogres are like onions. They're layers. And when you think about your grief and the layers, we're peeling those back, and it's painful and it's ugly, but it's ours. And, even onions have their place. And when they are cooked and processed well, they give food flavor. And if we can learn to get through those layers, to process our pain, there is some beauty or flavor or reason or purpose, whatever word does not trigger you. Think about that as we're going through these layers. And when I say trigger, when we talk about this in the Mentally Strong Method, it's like those triggers are really about us. There's nothing, I can't think of anything beautiful about losing a child. But that doesn't mean that there can't be beauty in my life. And so again, that anger came up. Day/week 11, I want you to just do some mapping of the cumulative loss. For me, it was actually multiple children. But when I say cumulative loss, like what else did you lose? I lost being a mother. I lost both of my biological children. My adopted children are grown. And I sometimes I feel like I lost being a mother. I lost because they had a neurodegenerative condition and they weren't normal. I lost things like being able to have a wedding or pay for college or like the normal things that a mother dreams about doing. That is another loss. So I want you to think about all the losses, not just death. The next lesson talks about the emotional teapot. Like we are all, if you think about a teapot or anything, a pressure cooker, anything that you put under pressure and you don't release it slowly, it will explode. And this often happens in grief and trauma or any kind of mental turmoil that is not being dealt with or processed. It becomes this boiling water under pressure, and we explode. Maybe we lash out at our spouse or our friends, our family, our kids, and it's not healthy. That's an unorganized layers. And so I want you to know that you've got to start releasing some of those things. Day 13, and I've talked about this before when we talk about the Mentally Strong method, in that separating grief and trauma. It gets enmeshed together and it gets enmeshed with our negative thoughts. But trauma is about fear and anger and what this has done to you. Grief is about loss. And these things need to be processed differently. We need to love and cherish the time we have with our children, our spouse or whoever you are grieving, without the trauma creeping into our thoughts, right? The trauma creeps in. And for me, trauma was different for both of my children. For Johnny, the trauma was like this, we thought everything was fine, and then this horrible accident and he's dead. With Reggie, his life was trauma. He started having catastrophic epilepsy at the age of 6. And literally this kid could have 12 grand mal seizures in a day. One time, his seizure was so intense, it broke his femur in half. The strongest bone in your body, and my son's broke in half during the seizure. He was in the ICU. He was in, thalamic storming, dystonic attacks. Like, his life was trauma, and I was fighting for his life all the time. His death was actually very peaceful. I mean, I've had to process some of my negative thoughts and what I should have taken him to the ER, but he literally just started having trouble breathing and went and died. Maya, on the other hand, her life was peace. She was my easy child. Everything worked, We started a new seizure med and it worked. And everyone loved to be around her. She was so loving. And she died that same peacefully, but it wasn't peaceful for me because she was supposed to live for a lot longer, 10 plus years. And I found her dead and I had to do CPR on her. And it was traumatic for me. But that wasn't her life. Her life was peaceful. Her life was sweet. She got to die in her sleep. She felt no trauma. But as I'm processing this grief, when I'm trying to connect and have a relationship with her and work through my spiritual conflict and get rid of my negative thoughts and cherish my relationship with her, I got to try not to think about that morning. And when I think about Reggie, I've got to think about all the things that we made sure we did for him, and not about those traumatic moments. Because trauma is about processing and releasing. Get it out of the body. It's not helping you. Grief is about processing and cherishing it, bringing it, holding it close. So sometimes as we're going through this and I'm talking about the layers, it might sound like I'm repeating myself. But because it's easier said than done. Like, you're going to have to do the hard work of these layers to release these things for yourself. The next lesson goes into another grief theory, picking a grief theory and learning it and studying it and figuring out what it says to you and how it helps your heart and maybe where it triggers your heart. I can tell you, I studied all of these grief theories, and I want to start sharing some of my favorite. Grief and attachment theory was very validating for me. I feel like, I want to say that losing a child, a biological child, is literally the worst grief and the worst pain. And because I've lost an adopted child, sometimes I feel guilty that the pain is not the same when I lost Johnny. And in this grief attachment theory, it talks about time spent and like how much this person was in your life has to do with how much pain. And this can also validate for other people who maybe didn't lose a child, maybe lost a spouse or even a partner, and other people aren't validating it, but they spent day in and day out with that person. So the grief and attachment theory has to do with how much time and how much involvement this person had in your life has to do with how painful it is, as well as physical attachment. So there's a hormone called oxytocin that is released during emotional bonding. It is released during, sexual intercourse, but it is most released when you breastfeed your child. And I breastfed both of my children, and it is released during childbirth. And so there was like this validation for me that it's okay, that the pain of losing Reggie and Maya feels worse than losing Johnny. So pick your theory, study a theory. It is part of those layers. And I think we have one more time where we do that. Day 16, week 16, managing your expectations of grief. The time and the energy it takes, the expectation that time heals all wounds. I call BS on that, right? Like, not unless you're actually processing it and using the energy, instead of using energy to stuff it and not feel it, but using the energy to actually feel it. So that one just talks about kind of managing those expectations as one of your layers. And even I have spoke with like spiritual healers and things like that talk about grief. Even for a healer, when they are personally in grief, their vibration is lower. So give yourself grace. This is hard work. And sometimes, I'll kind of beat myself up. Oh my gosh, I'm sleeping 9 hours. Like, I shouldn't need that much sleep. Or gosh, I'm tired. I can't find the energy to exercise. Give yourself grace. This takes a lot of energy. Don't stop moving. Remember self-movement, right? But if you can't actually do physical exercise, then that's fine. Just go for a little walk. Listen to music. Use some sort of vibration. Do something to try to move this pain out of the body. When I talk about layers, when you get to the core, when you get down to the bottom, and you feel this pain you're trying not to feel, unbearable pain that you have to bear, you could get to a point of feeling suicidal. And please, if that feeling is real and intense, go to the ER. Go to a psych hospital. Go to a psychiatrist. Do not stop yourself from getting professional help. But also know that I have not spoken to one parent who has lost a child that hasn't, not that has actually planned it or is going to do it, but has not felt that pain. And I remember, and whether you believe in the Bible or not, there's a verse in there where Jesus was in Gethsemane and he was feeling pain, emotional pain. And he said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." So even Jesus, and whether you believe in that whole thing or not, he was a person. And he got to the point of so much emotional pain that it felt like death. That's what suicidal thoughts are. They're this, like, I have nothing else to describe the pain. Nothing else to describe the pain. And so on this day, in the middle of my 45 days of grief, I really kind of got to the core of that and felt at my worst, at the worst of my pain. And I remind each of you to make suicide not an option. Don't do it. Suicide not an option. Confronting your grief and pain. Finding life and purpose. And then when I got to the bottom of that pain, and I just had to sit and feel it for a while. There's not a lot of worksheets around that. Like, it's your pain. You're going to have to feel it. But then I had to go to, like, who am I? Am I even a mother? And this worksheet here is just a placeholder for once you get to the bottom of that pain, and then you've got to build yourself out. Like, if you unpeeled all of the layers and you're at the core, how do you put the layers back? Like, who am I? And, these questions are just some prompts, but really you might need to write yourself a letter. I had to spend over a year, like, trying to figure out, who am I? What do I like? What do I like to do? Went back to things I liked to do as a kid, a young adult, and tried to incorporate those, like some, like didn't. So this worksheet doesn't encompass it all, but it just gives you a placeholder of, who am I? And how am I going to build myself back up? Then it goes into personal vision, right? Who do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be? I want to be a kind person that helps people, that is constantly insightful and aware of my own emotions. I want to be that person that takes care of those 5 selves, that I know how to take care of myself, that I can love myself. And it's a process. And in ways you have to learn how to know yourself and like yourself first before you can love yourself. And, someone who can self-regulate, who knows how to move things out of the body, who has a solid, genuine spiritual relationship. That's who I want to be, right? So those are my personal visions. And I challenge you to figure out yours. And if you're at this point where you're going through the layers and you're not done, you might need to pause, right? Because now we're kind of trying to come out of it. Like, And, you know, when you're at that deep core, like I said, if there's suicidality, severe depression, get help. This is, now we can build. We got to the bottom of it. It was ugly. It was nasty. It was painful. Now we're going to build. There's some journal prompts here around grief, but it's about creating that connection with your loved one. And then, anger comes up again. You can see for me, and I think for a lot of people, we think we're doing well, and then bam, anger comes up again. So, do something with it. Now you know what it is, right? You have acknowledged it. You chose to grieve. You chose to acknowledge the anger. You are, you know what it's there for. You know what's underneath it. When it comes up, deal with it. This is just one of the ways I do it. Burn, break, break things. One time I took all the flower, right after Maya's death, and I took all the flower vases in my garage and I just smashed them to the ground. I wouldn't recommend that because glass was everywhere and it was hard to clean up. But at the moment, it was conscious and I needed it. I also have a punching bag in my house. I also sometimes write things and burn them in the fire. So finding, you know what the anger is now. Find what works for you. Deal with it. On day 22 of these layers of grief, well, what are these things? Can two things be true? We talk about it in psychiatry as dialectical thinking, but I can tell you, for me, this is how it turned out, right? I'm so angry. The pain is unbearable. I mean, I truly believe when I'm in it and I'm feeling it, it feels unbearable. But I'm also grateful that she didn't suffer, that Maya didn't suffer. And both of those things can coexist. I've been destroyed by what I lost. But I am also grateful for what I still have. And I am grateful for the time that I had with them. So I will never be happy in the way that I imagined, right? I always wanted to be like the best mother, and I will never be happy with that, right? But I'm still capable of being happy. I'm capable of finding happiness. Oh, and then I know it seems like a repeat, but untangling your thoughts. I've said this a million times. Untangling those thoughts. It's how we process grief. Our grief and our trauma and our negative thoughts and our choices and our behaviors and our triggers, it's all enmeshed together. You got to separate those things. This activity is about untangling those thoughts as far as your story is concerned. And like, if you look at the facts of my story, my children have an uncurable neurodegenerative disease that no one could have foreseen that we were going to have. And there was nothing we could have done for that. And when I'm in my negative place, I'm like, oh, God didn't love me. God didn't protect me. I wasn't smart enough. God didn't help me find a cure for them. But that's me and my negative story. And if I rewrite that, and this is what this activity is about, rewriting that story is, boy, the hardship that I've been through has made me so intelligent and empathetic and insightful to people who have been through all kinds of tragedies. And I am a better person for it. And I have learned spiritual things that I never would have known had my children still been here. And I even think of it from a practical standpoint. Let's say there was a way to test for DRPLA, and we got tested before I got pregnant, and they said, oh, your husband has this, and, we suggest that you don't have children. The smart thing to do would be to not have children. And I don't think that's what we would have done. I mean, no, actually, I do think that's what we would have done because we are both smart, educated people. But looking back, I would not take away the time that I have had with Reggie and Maya, even knowing that they were going to die. Those kids taught me so much about life. And so, rewrite your story. Don't take out the pain. But what has the pain provided? What did that relationship provide that had you never met or had that person in your life, you would not be? So rewrite that story. So this is, you're getting through all the layers. I will show you that how the Mentally Strong method helps. And this is a long-term process. And we're going to, go into finding truth and those kinds of things. But remember, these layers might come up again later. But you want to get to the core and feel the pain. I know you don't want to. The healthiest thing for you to do is to get to the core, feel the pain, and then build yourself back up.